Well, today we're visiting with Nancy Duncan, a longtime member of Hope United Methodist Church. Nancy, tell me how you first heard about this Christian community we call Hope.
Well, I grew up in Denver, but we moved back here in 1977, and we lived very close to the church. So I was looking for a Methodist church. I've always been involved in Methodist churches and all my life, and so I looked for a Methodist church, and at that time they were meeting in the school. And so I went to a couple of services, and to be honest, I just really wasn't that excited about it, mostly because I really wasn't, I don't know, the pastor really didn't reach to me very much, so I sort of stopped looking. And, a couple of years later, I was playing bridge with a charter member, Peggy Hansen, and if you've seen any of these tapes, you know that Peggy Hansen was quite a member of this church.
Absolutely.
And I mentioned that, and she said, "Oh, well, you've got to come. We have a new pastor, and you'll love it, and you have to come." So I said, okay, and I came on Sunday, and on Thursday night I walked in to the choir practice. Barb Blair was directing the choir, and I'm still singing in the choir.
Well, tell me what you remember about the worship services that were held at the school. How did that go?
Well, I was only at a couple of them, but it wasn't they were at a school that really bothered me. Because that didn't bother me so much, but I remember they were in the gymnasium or probably the recreation fellowship room, or whatever that was.
Yeah.
I do remember that one of the first services I went to, Mary Witt sang a soul. And I was really, being in the choir, I was really impressed with that, but I don't know, anyway, it just didn't appeal to me at the time.
But they did have a choir?
Oh,
They
yeah.
have a
Oh, yeah,
piano
they had.
and a
And
choir?
Barb Blair was directing, and she was the
Yeah.
first choir director. But by the time I came and she brought me, and we were in this building, although doesn't look anything like this building.
It was the only building here at that time in
Yeah.
79, 80
Yeah, there wasn't anything else.
that we now call the Schultz Fellowship Hall.
But yeah, and what we now call Fellowship Hall was the sanctuary. And of course, I'm sure somebody else has mentioned the fact that what is now the elevator shaft was the kitchen. And the first time I ever walked in to help in the kitchen, I just, there were like 5 ladies in this. It was hysterical. And the offices were pretty much what is now, I think, the library, and I think there must have been a wall along here. We're doing this interview in the library, and the offices were along in here someplace, and they were just minute. Because when I became membership secretary of the church, financial secretary, January 1st, 1983. So I had sort of a little office, but little. And this coming January 1st will be 35 years that I've been a volunteer staff member of the church. I've had 3 different
Several different
jobs.
during that time,
Yeah.
yes.
I was financial secretary, then I was treasurer for 15 years, and now I'm the membership secretary. And I like numbers.
Well, you remember Victor Schultz was the pastor at that time?
Very, very well. Victor was so wonderful, and he came to visit. He came to visit our home. We just lived right over here, and I remember Victor. And he was a wonderful, warm, loving man. And then, of course, Al Brown. And I've been a volunteer staff member for every pastor this church has had, except for Bob Cole. So I remember them all very well.
Yes.
Some things will go on tape, and some things won't.
Well, you mentioned Victor Schultz being a warm person, and
Oh, yeah.
everybody loved him. But what do you remember about Al Brown?
Al Brown was sort of warm and fuzzy too, but one thing I remember about him, he stood out in front of the church and smoked his pipe every Sunday morning, and everybody just used to get really mad about that. But no, and he was very genuine and very warm and stuff. But the associate pastor, when the associate pastor at that time came in with Al, John Laughlin, they didn't get along real well. And I mean, because John was very hardcore, do it this way, and Al was kind of loose and easygoing. And I liked Al Brown really well. And He was easy to work with, and he was a good fun man. I enjoyed him.
Well, tell me what the services were like when they were having the congregation all meet and worship in the Schultz Fellowship Hall.
Well, they just had chairs all set up, just like you would in an auditorium or something like that, and there was a piano. There was when I first came, I don't remember if there was an organ or not. There must have been, but it was just a standard little organ. It wasn't anything, of course, like we have now. And therein lies another tale, which I'll get to later. But anyway, and then but one of the things I remember about those services is that there was a very big, less than singularly attractive stained glass cross hanging on the wall in there.
Yes, I remember that.
Was not, there were a lot of people that just didn't really like it a whole lot.
And as I recall, it lit up.
Well,
it had a light inside
did. And I was there this Sunday that somebody from the congregation got up and said, "You know that this church, this lights up," and he plugged the thing in, and then it was really garish. Oh my, it was, everybody was, and it eventually, some kids were playing basketball there, and it got singularly damaged, and so that was the end of the stained glass cross.
Well, I remember that Fellowship Hall, Schultz Fellowship Hall, was used for everything.
Oh, it was everything.
Socials, the youth would play in there and have...
that was all there was.
The only building we had at that time.
Yeah, that was the only building we had, and so that was all there was. And of course, the choir, you came in those main double doors and walked in just marched in there. And the church I came from in Virginia right before I was here, we met in a similar circumstances. So I was very comfortable with that. But there's always room for a seat when you sing in the choir,
Yes. Well, you remember the days before the parking lot was paved?
Well, I must, because I was here then, but I don't remember well. It seems to me the parking lot's has 2 or 3 iterations. I mean, I think it's been added on to and striped and restriped and all these things.
Yes.
I asked for a brief period of time right after they built the new sanctuary. My husband was on the board of trustees, partly because he was in the building construction industry, and so he was kind of involved, and they were doing some, I know there were drainage problems and all kinds of stuff, and he was all involved in that, and the roof leaking on the new sanctuary. That's how my husband got involved in the board of trustees, because the roof leaked in the new sanctuary from day one.
Oh.
To
Well,
this day.
the church was growing quite a bit in the early 80s, and they decided to build the new sanctuary.
Yeah.
You remember those days?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, because I was treasurer of the church when they financed building the new sanctuary.
Yeah.
But one of the things that people probably don't know is when you join this church, there's enrollment numbers, and everybody has a number. And the first number, of course, was number 1. And by the time I joined in 1980, my number was 513. So that's a substantial growth just in those, because now we had a building.
Sure.
But I was very involved in the finances of when they built the new sanctuary and all of that. In fact, at some point around here, there's a book I put together of every penny that went in and out of that. And there was a lot of discussion about it and what was paid for what and things like that. Yeah. I remember one of the things Al Brown did for that. It just popped in my head, but we needed umpty-ump dollars, I forget what it was, to finish some of what we needed to do. And he sent out a letter to every member, youth members, every member, and said if every member paid, I don't remember the X amount, I think it was like $42.69, we could pay this debt. And I cannot tell you, as treasurer of the church, how difficult it was to handle all those checks for $42.69. And that's what people paid.
But people responded.
Some people rounded it up. Or they paid double, 85.38, whatever it was. But it was hysterical. But it really worked. It was so finite that, and everybody, $42, I can handle that. So they did. It was a great fundraising. I've suggested it since several times, but unfortunately, I think it would be more than $42.69.
It might
so
be.
I don't think it would work quite so.
Well, you remember when we moved into the new sanctuary? Tell us how that went.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, I sing in the choir, and the choir. The acoustics in that room are extremely different you can imagine, from singing in what is now Fellowship Hall. And the choir finally did get in there to practice on the Thursday before the Sunday of the Christmas cantata. And it was like being in an entirely different place. I mean, they were laying the carpeting and hammering and pounding and moving and laying the carpeting and doing all this stuff. And and our organist at the time, Jeanette Palmer, was the organist at the time, and when she got here on Sunday morning, as I remember, she couldn't get in because they changed the locks on the doors in the meantime, and she couldn't even get in. And then, of course, they had moved the organ from Fellowship Hall into the sanctuary, and when they moved the organ, they erased all the stops that she had set for all the Christmas music. You know, an organist, if you're not a musician, an organist sets all kinds of settings to make the organ sound all these different ways. And when they moved the organ, they erased all the stops she had set up.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
we sang our Christmas cantata with brand new carpeting, and it still smelled from all its laying carpeting.
Yes.
Not having any idea what the acoustics were like, with an organist that was just fit to be tied. And we all smiled and everybody loved it. You know, there's more of that goes on than you think.
A lot behind the scenes.
And I've always been involved in that, and it kind of makes me chuckle because people just, you know, the congregation for the most part comes in and everything looks fine and it looks lovely, and and there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time making it look like that, but you don't realize, or near disasters that have happened.
Yes.
But that Christmas, that was about the worst. I mean, in terms of it, and of course, then it's a beautiful sanctuary. You know, it's lovely, and it has been remodeled, of course, but since then.
Yes. And it's big enough to accommodate our needs, and
Oh yeah,
generally.
yeah. And of course, well, back in those days, or Christmas and Easter and a couple of major funerals, I remember it's been packed to the rafters. But for the most part, it accommodates people pretty easily.
Yes. Well, you mentioned that you have been the financial secretary or treasurer of the church. What other positions have you held?
Well, official staff positions, as I said, financial secretary, treasurer, and membership secretary, which I am now currently. But I have chaired or served on, 4 or 5 committees. Gifts, memorials, membership and evangelism, the worship committee, lay leadership, several different committees and things. And then I do other little things around the church here and there. I'm on the coffee team, and I read scripture. And, you know, that's one thing. I volunteer extensively. Obviously, I've been doing it for 35 years, and it's my family. People say, why so long? I believe wholeheartedly in volunteering for whatever group you're in. And I don't care if it's a club, if it's a committee, or your church. And I believe that it is only by volunteering that it becomes your church. And I don't care if it's a little tiny job, if it's being an usher one Sunday every 6 weeks, which isn't a tiny job, but it's a job. I don't care what it is. I just believe you have to do that to really be part of any organization.
Well, you've certainly been motivated by something, because you have done so many jobs here at the church.
Actually, I volunteered down at Channel 6 public television originally at the same time when I first started volunteering here. And a man spoke to us once, and he was a person who went to corporations and spoke to them about the value of encouraging their employees to volunteer. Because they were better employees, they were happier, healthier, and lived longer. And so that's why I do it, I guess.
Well, tell us a little bit about what this church means to you.
Well, hope means everything to me. I have moved 3 times since I've been joined in this church, and every time I've moved farther and farther away from the church. But hope is where I belong. And I don't mean just because I've joined the church. I mean, it's just a part of me. And hope is where I've been very blessed. I haven't had a lot of tragedies in my life, but hope is the church I came into when my son was going to have a very serious operation. He's fine, but it's where I came. And I'm just the things that hope supplies to people. I've happened to be here 2 or 3 different times when people in need have wandered into the church on a Saturday. One night, I don't know, almost makes tears come in my eyes, but I was here alone at night. This was many, many years ago, all by myself. It was December, and a man came and knocked on the doors of the church. And at that time, my desk I could see out the windows, and these are the Memorial Garden doors. And it's like 8 o'clock at night, and I'm all alone. And something told me to go to the door, and I did. And this man was standing there, and he said he was from out of town. He had just received word his brother had died, and could he come in to the sanctuary and pray? And I called the pastor who was writing his sermon at the time, Sam Day, and Sam came over and spent almost an hour with that man.
Wow.
But that kind of thing, I mean, that to me, I'll never forget that. And in this day and age, I don't know, would a woman alone in a church in the middle of the night even think of answering the door? It's sad to say, I'm not
That's
sure.
true. That's true.
And even then, but somebody said, anyway, that man. And the other thing that happened that's sort of similar that really meant a lot to me was I was here again on Saturday organizing name tags, or I don't know, doing something. And a woman and a young girl walked in. The girl was, I don't know, 11 or 12. And she came up and she said, do we know anything about the Memorial Garden? And I said, yeah, what do you need? Turned out her parents had gotten divorced and her father was buried in the Memorial Garden, this young girl. And she'd never been to his grave. And she wanted to see where her daddy was buried.
Wow.
And so we went out and I found the plaque on the wall and we took a picture of her with the plaque and she just stood there with the tears running down her cheeks and said, oh, thank you so much. And those things happen just because I'm here in the church, but that's what a church does for people, and it's what it means to me.
Thank you. That's
And
terrific.
for me, it's the music. I sing in the choir. I always have music as a part of my life. My mother was a church organist, and when she met my father, and when I was a young girl, baby girl, 3, 4, 5 years old, she was a church organist.
Yeah.
And I've told Cheryl, I used to come home from school, and Mother would be practicing the piano, and she'd stop when I came in the front door. And so I would sit on the front steps and listen to her play.
So she wouldn't stop.
And I've told Cheryl, to this day, when Cheryl sits down and starts doing the magic that she does on that piano,
You don't want her to stop playing.
No, I don't want her to stop either.
Yeah.
No, so and the music means everything to me. I mean, it's through music that I do not hear well, and so it's very hard for me at this point in my life to hear amplified sound and things, but the music and the words of the songs and being part of singing it's very meaningful to me. And it has been.
And to this day you sing in a choir, right?
Yep, I still sing in the choir.
Yep. Well, let's back up a little bit. After Al Brown left, Dr. Vickery, Richard Vickery came. Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
And what do you remember about Dr. Vickery?
That's a tougher question. Dr. Vickery came to this church at a time that was difficult for him in his pastoral life. He'd just recently been divorced and things, and to be honest, he didn't particularly appreciate having a female treasurer who sometimes said no.
Oh, really?
And so that was a very difficult time. But one of the things he did, and at the time, I don't know, I was not wholeheartedly in favor of it, but he was responsible for our stained glass windows. And it wasn't that I wasn't in favor of having the stained glass windows, it was that we didn't have any money in place for it.
Right.
And we really didn't have any money. I mean, back in those days, the church really didn't
Things
have
were tough.
any money. And so he started the program of the stained glass of getting those stained glass windows in. And the first one, which was the Christmas tide window, the way they did it was they sold pieces of the window, and I don't know if people know that, but there's a book sitting out on the table that I put together,
Yes,
a
you
photo
did.
book, and it says in it who bought. Like one family bought Mary's hand, and another family bought the baby, and then they charged a little more than the pieces actually cost, and then that money went in to paying the fees that we had to pay to the company that designed the windows. They were all designed simultaneously, and the blue glass that's in those windows was chosen because it matched what in the carpeting in the sanctuary, and all that blue glass was for all the windows was bought in one time in advance, so the dye lots would all match. But anyway, Dr. Vickery did that, and kind of not totally according to all the rules and regulations. And I was kind of upset about that. But I think he probably would be fascinated to know that I've sort of become the proponent of our stained glass windows.
Well, the book that you prepared
Okay.
is terrific because it has a page for each one of the panels and tells the story and also indicates who gave the money.
Well, yeah, and it also has in it all our kneeling cushions
Yes.
that were made by the women of this church, and who made them, and who the women of this church did the needlepoint on all those kneeling cushions, and they're also in there, as are all the banners that hang in the sanctuary. And again, all those banners were made by women of the church. Designed and made by women of the church. The Easter ones, it happens, my husband and I made the monstrous pattern, which would, the woman who sews them has to lay it on our ping pong table. Those are huge, you know.
Yes.
And we had all this paper all over our house, and we were making the full-size patterns for them and stuff like that. But as far as Dick Vickery went, I think it was a difficult time for him, but he did spearhead those windows, and one of the windows was the Pentecost window, was all given by church members in his honor for his ministry, and I'm sure that was very meaningful to him.
Yeah.
And down in here, I keep thinking I really should send him a picture of all those windows. Coming from me, I think he'd be surprised because I was.
Well, as the historian, I value the books that you prepared that tell part of the history and the people involved and how those things came together. That's a treasure for this church.
When we're gone, those of us who've
Yes.
been here a long time, like I know you've talked to the charter members of the church, it'll be gone. I mean, I do photo books for my family, for my grandchildren, because I just believe that if you don't have those things, it will be gone. People will forget, you know. I've done 2 or 3 programs on the stained glass windows, and they're beautiful.
Yep.
They're
Well,
incredibly beautiful.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, well, it was
Well,
a labor of
after
love.
after Dr. Vickery, Sam Day was the senior pastor. You remember Sam?
Well, I have to say, I suppose you're not real political, but Sam was my favorite of them all. Sam was just wonderful, and I'll tell you something Sam did for me, and personally, and this is very personal, but when my daughter got engaged, she got engaged to a young man whose family was from a different religion, and his uncles were going to perform the ceremony, and it couldn't be here in the church because his family couldn't come. And I was very concerned, and I went to Sam in April, and I'm telling him I was deeply concerned, and he looked at me and he said, "When's the wedding?" And I said, "Well, it's Labor Day weekend." At that time, Sam went up to his place in Estes Park.
Yes.
Okay. The wedding, this was April. He got on his calendar, and he wrote down Labor Day weekend, and he said, "If you need me, I'll be there for you." And sure enough, along about the end of July, my son-in-law's uncles couldn't or wouldn't do the ceremony. And my son-in-law met with Sam, and they worked out the ceremony so that it would be okay for Methodist Church and okay for his family. And Sam did that wedding ceremony.
Oh, that's a great story.
And then afterwards, he didn't stay for the reception. He went up to Estes Park. But I can still see him sitting there. If you need me, I'll be there. And Sam was like that.
Yeah.
And Sam was our pastor when the church, as I mentioned earlier, we really didn't have any money. And we would meet. Clay Hill was finance chair, and Sam and Clay and I would meet before the finance meetings and talk about what we were going to talk about and what was going to happen. It was pretty difficult. It wasn't until we refinanced the church that we got back on a more even footing. But
Yeah.
I mean, it was serious in those days.
Well, over the 42 years of the church, it's had good days and several episodes where they're pretty slim pickings as far as
Well,
money
I
coming
was-
in.
There were times when I wasn't sure there was enough money in the bank to pay the electric bill. I mean, it was that. And so when people want a cushion and a thing, believe me, it was the debt was crippling us.
Yeah.
And it was when we sold bonds, and it was somewhat complex, but we'd had a bond issue. And that was how we refinanced the church.
Yeah.
And once we did that, then now we're on. We still need more operating money, of course, always, but run a much more firm footing.
Yeah.
But Sam was, and well, of course, the other thing Sam did was Sam established the Sam Day Award.
Yeah.
And Sam would get up and charge conference meetings and thank John and Henry and Susie and Sam and et cetera, and all people. And finally, it bothered him that he was probably leaving people out. So he came up with the idea of this. He called it the Quiet Disciple Award. And it was to just take one person who had done a lot and thank them publicly, give them an award on behalf of all of the volunteers of the church. And it still is stressed sometimes, but sometimes I think it isn't stressed quite enough that when the various people get that award. Charlie, I know you've gotten it, and I was lucky enough to be the first recipient of it. But it's to thank all the volunteers, and you can't thank them all, so they choose one who's done a lot of things. And it's supposed to be for people who've done quiet things that people don't see or notice so much, But really, my plaque getting the Sam Day Award is one of the most meaningful things I have. I mean, it really means a lot to me. And of course, they still at Charge Conference. Everybody stands up who's got the Sam Day Award. I remember when Charlie Ledbetter, Mr. Interviewer here, got it, and we were having a joint church conference meeting at a church, and Charlie is poised with his camera in hand to take the pictures of the recipient of the award, and over here is somebody with a camera to take pictures of Charlie. And the look on his face was absolutely priceless.
I was flabbergasted.
He was so surprised, and everybody knew. I mean, because usually it's a big secret, but lots of people had to know because we had to work it out to get pictures of Charlie because he was supposed to be taking pictures of the recipient. It was just wonderful.
Well, many people remember Sam Day for his somewhat unique style of sermons. Do you remember those?
Oh, Sam. Well, I'm sure other people have said, but Sam always had 3 topics in his sermons, and they were weird. I mean, it was like the little boy who rode his roller skates to school, the girl who didn't have a formal for a dance, and the man who stopped smoking a pipe. I mean, I just made those up. But if they were that dissimilar, and they were always 3, and they were always fairly lengthy. And somehow, and you got to the point where you'd sit there and say, okay, this time, how's he going to get this all worked into the sermon? But somewhere in this church, there's a picture of a cartoon that somebody gave to Sam when he came, and we used to have a bulletin board out in front of the church that had the Sunday sermon on it, and this cartoon had a picture of this bulletin board with a big, long extra piece on the side to have room for Sam's 3, and it was hysterical. And I don't know where that cartoon is, but I saw it someplace. Maybe it's in your historical thing. But they gave that to Sam, and his sermons were. But Sam also, it was the good news. That's why it's the Sam Day Good News just award now, because Sam always preached the good news, and he was very upbeat. And he told me more than once, I remember I was treasurer, that he would go home from finance meetings just worried to death. But he didn't ever really, he was very positive in meetings and things like that, although everybody in finance was aware that things were really pretty serious. But Sam was just, it wasn't that long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, that he came up here for something. He was here once Sunday. It was so good to see him. Yeah. But Sam, like I say, he did a favor for me and my daughter and my family and Sam my husband was very close to Sam. Oh. And that was a good thing. It was fun.
Yes. Well, after Sam Day, Margaret Hankins was the pastor here. You remember Margaret?
Margaret is still here.
Yes, Margaret's still here.
But Margaret was co-pastor with John.
Yes, with John Lee.
And Margaret was. Well, I've told Margaret this, so I guess it's fine to just say this on tape. But when Margaret was the district superintendent before that, and Sam had been district superintendent too.
Yes. But
Margaret was, and when she was district superintendent, she would come to the meetings. I always thought Margaret was pretty. She wore hair kind of long and straight, and she was very serious. As district superintendents, I guess, have to be. And when she came to Hope, she was just. By then, she'd married Jim, and she was wonderful. And I think it was a very new concept to have a co-pastorship. And I've always believed, and I don't think I'm far off, that the conference really wanted a female pastor in one of the major churches in the conference. And I think that's how they worked it out with, and so Margaret and John, in this day and age, it's hard to remember, but both Marilyn Lesser, who was an associate pastor here, and Margaret have told me how extremely difficult it was for women when they first became pastors. I think that Marilyn Lesser was, I think, one of the first females that graduated from the School of Theology, Isla. And and so they wanted Margaret in, and so they thought that having co-pastors would be. And John was, a couple of years? I think John was here for a couple of years. And they were very different, and it was kind of nice in a way to have two co-pastors, because they had very different sermon styles.
Yes.
If I'm searching for the right word,
yes.
I think styles is the word I'd be searching for. And then when John left, and then Margaret was co-pastor with Steve.
Mm-hmm. Steve Miller.
Steve Miller for a long time.
Yes.
And they worked that out. And then Steve, he always kind of hankered to be the pastor himself. And it was Margaret finally retired, and Steve became the pastor himself, And then it was difficult for him. I think it's more difficult than he thought it would be. But my husband was in contact with Steve recently. He's down in Woodcliff now, my husband. That contacted him about something else. But Margaret, of course, and it's very rare that someone who's been a pastor at a church is still so active in the church.
To come back to that church, that's right.
The conference worked out some sort of a special deal that Margaret she went away for 6 months, and it was partly because Jim was such an active member of the church too, and then that she could come back and be at this church. But that is not done that often. But it's worked out wonderfully in Margaret.
Well, Margaret was something of a pioneer, because times were changing and females were taking more of a leadership role. Did you have any problem with that?
Oh, no.
I didn't think so.
No, but I recognized that it was difficult and unusual. I don't have any problem with that, and I'm not an terribly outspoken woman's. I'm not like that, but I thought it was great to have a female pastor, and they bring a whole different concept different feeling to pastoral relations and things like that.
Yes.
And there's some women that I imagine that feel a lot. I've never had any problem talking with any of the pastors we've had, well, most of them, and never felt that it had to be a female, but there are a lot of women that can respond more easily, I think, to a female pastor.
Yes, and Margaret, I think, handled that with elegance and grace. She was a very gracious person.
Very gracious, and she handled the whole. When she finally did decide to retire, and then Steve was here by himself, all of that, it was all handled. The Methodist Church is nothing if it's not methodical. There's a good reason for that. And our system of every pastor is reappointed every single year. There's a method to that, and that's a good thing, because it makes some difficult things easier. This has nothing to do with hope. I will tell you a story about my mother-in-law belonged to a church back in New Jersey, and at that time they had a manse, a pastor's home, and they wanted to get rid of the pastor, and he refused to move, so they sold the manse. Now, it's a whole lot easier the way, of course, pastors can own their own homes now, but our system, our methodical system it's a very good system. It gives the church a chance to say, we're happy, we're not happy, so, and, and they move pastors around.
Yep.
And so, and I sometimes laugh at people, they talk about the church and the discipline of this. Well, where do you think the name Methodist came from?
Isn't that the truth?
We're methodical. and that's all right. Obviously, if I've been a financial secretary, a treasurer, and a membership secretary, I'm pretty, I'm not rigid, but I do.
There's a method to this madness. Yes.
Statistics and things.
Yep.
I think I drive our current pastor mad because I'm so into statistics, and I think sometimes he rolls me to say, "Oh, here she goes again."
Well, before we started this interview, you mentioned that you remembered something about when we bought the current organ and went on that campaign.
Well, I was talking about when we moved the organ, but when we bought the current organ, that was a huge money-raising campaign, and it's a phenomenal piece of it's a phenomenal instrument, and we needed someone phenomenal to play it too when we bought it.
Yes.
But we also had a huge fundraising campaign for the Steinway piano that we
Yes.
have too,
Yes.
and so that was all kind of done. And but many people contributed substantially to the. In fact, my mother's memorial money went into buying the original baby grand piano we had that was sold to get the Steinway. So I would. But the organ was financing it. There was, whenever we're trying to finance something out of the ordinary, there has to be a special fund. And they're not all $42.69 per member, but
Yes, that's true.
there has to be a way
Well, one of the things I remember about indicate to me the sophistication of that instrument was that Ted Loveland programmed the organ to play itself. He had played it and somehow recorded it, and then he came around and sang while the organ played the accompaniment without him sitting there to do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Cheryl has played piano organ duets
Yes.
with herself.
That's quite a feat.
And that, it sits there and plays and your stuff like that. Choir practices are fun. I mean, we've all been together a long time, we all kind of laugh about this. And poor Cheryl has to bounce back and forth between the piano and the organ, and that's really hard. But the thing that's always fascinated me about organ playing is where I sit. I used to sit in the front row of the choir. Now I know you can watch their feet. And if you've ever watched organists, and especially when they're playing something, or even, and Cheryl will have these pieces of music, and she'll have 8 pieces of music spread out and they're just black with notes, And you sit there and you look at it and you think, how does she do that? How does she see all that? She's phenomenal. We're very lucky, and it was very, very sad for us when, Robert left, but Larry is just doing a wonderful job. He's bringing a lot of good music to us, and, and it's we've been through a lot of changes, not just pastors, but associate pastors, staff people come and gone. And it can be very heartbreaking when someone that you really like leaves, but for the most part, we've done pretty well with new people coming in, and people will adjust to it for the most part.
Well, the music program here has been terrific, in my opinion, and I know you've been a big part of that.
Well,
are there particular people you recall that either sang here or played the instruments?
I'd have to stop and think about. Well, of course, there was a period of time when we had the wonderful, wonderful trio, Mary Witt, Sally Robertson, and Ruth Most, and they sang some great stuff, and just beautiful, beautiful trios. And and Ted sometimes accompanied them. I mean, and they did gigs other places.
Yes.
And they were all in the choir. At one time, they were all in the choir, although they didn't all. Sally and Sally kind of left the choir shortly before they left the church here, and now Ruth is she lives way out in Grand Ranch, so Ruth is going to another church now. But the three of them were really amazing, and a gentleman who, in fact, he's just sang a solo this last Sunday is Hilton Martin, who they were members of the church a while back, and then they left and gone, and they've just recently come back to the church, and Sam Day, he at his charge conferences, Sam liked to do something that was kind of fun and different and festive, and to kind of liven things up, because frankly, I mean, they really can be pretty dry. So, and we always did. I mean, we gave out. The trio came and sang "Everything's Coming Up Roses," and we gave out roses to all the ladies one year. But one year he had Hilton Martin play the piano and sing "Great Balls of Fire." And I mean, that place was rocking. And I'm not sure the DS thought it was as wonderful as we all did, but it sure was fun. It sure did live and things. And I reminded him of that, and he kind of just, I think he wasn't totally comfortable with singing Great Balls of Fire at the church conference. But he's got that kind of a voice, and if you were here last Sunday, you heard him sing it. So
Yes.
I remember him. And well, right now, in fact, I mean, we've had some really great voices, and in fact, when I first started singing in the choir, when I first came to the choir all those many years ago, we were very small and we were very short of tenors, and I had an extremely good friend. His name was Wendell Bell, who was a very fine
I remember
tenor.
Wendell, yes.
And I talked Wendell into coming to Hope, and I brought him into choir practice shortly before Christmas, and I said, "Barb, here's your Christmas present. I have a tenor for you." And Wendell sang with the choir for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was with the choir. And there are a lot of us, there are several people who've been in that choir a very long time. I mean, we just, and we want and encourage the younger people to come and sing in the choir too. We have a few younger ones, but we need some, we're not all going to be around forever.
That's right. Well, Nancy, you've been an active member here for many years. Do you have a favorite memory of Hope Church in your life and your participation here?
Yeah, but it's very personal.
And you don't have to share either.
Well, no, I'm glad to. I've been involved in so many things and so many neat things and so many times, and I don't know, committee meetings and people and things like that. And when you asked me to do this interview, I started thinking about all the things and you asked me what does hope mean to me? And when this was 5 years ago, but when we heard that our son he was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor and he was to have surgery, and I came over here all by myself, and it must have been after working hours. I was all alone because I've been in and out of the church so much, and went in that sanctuary, and I found the cushion on the floor that said joy. I didn't, not even hope, but joy, because I just wanted something positive, and went in that sanctuary, and that. When you can do that and come in and all by yourself and be part of it, then it's part of your life. And it's just, like I say, I'm a Methodist church that I've visited a couple times. It's delightful. It's 5 minutes from my house, and I now live 30 minutes away from the church.
Yes.
And I love Hope. And has every minute of it been wonderful? Have I really, truly enjoyed every pastor we've had? No. But it's my church, and the people here are just people that I've known all these years, and it just means so much to me.
That's a good testimony for this community of faith and what it's meant to you.
Yeah, it is.
Well, you've seen a lot of things in 42 years history of this church. What would you like to see it do in the next 42 years?
Oh, wow. Oh, boy. That's a toughie. I would like, fortunately, I mean, our congregation is growing. We've just taken in quite a few new members and things like that. And I think I don't know that people, there are older people that participate in the groups and things that we participate in, congenial couples, the Why Nots, I play in the Ladies' Bridge, there were those things. And the younger people are significantly involved in Sunday school, and because we have children's program, it's phenomenal. I mean, the Vacation Bible School. But I think what I miss more than anything else, and I think makes a feeling of mixing all these people, is we don't have as many dinners and suppers together as we used to have. And I think they've tried some and they haven't been successful, but we used to have burrito dinners.
Yes, I remember.
And
spaghetti dinners.
We had spaghetti dinners, we had burrito dinners, we had at least a couple of times a year. And I think that all church thing, and I think they've tried some, and for some reason, maybe it's because so many women are working now. In the early days they weren't. Maybe that's why it's so hard to do things like that. They've tried those things, but I mean, I think our worship services are excellent. They're very spiritually rewarding, and I think they're wonderful. But I don't know. I would just like to see more. Everybody all kind of getting together and doing things, multi-generational, I guess, and because it's true of all churches, there's a big gap in our membership along about the 24 to 35, and then once they start having children, then a lot of them do come back.
Yes.
But, and they're not real active, and hopefully, that area is, and I know they're working on, I know that the staff, the people work on that all the time. And let's face it, the membership as a whole is getting older. We're still here, John.
Yeah. Well, it was pleasing to me this summer when we had one worship service, because we typically come to the early service, to see how many young families with children attended the second service. When we just had one, everybody was together.
Yeah.
And I think that's your point. It adds to the whole experience when you see everybody.
And everybody says they loved the one service this summer. They loved having everybody in one because they saw people they didn't get to see. But the fact of the matter is, because I am a numbers person, overall attendance was average less this summer. Because,
yeah, that's interesting.
well, there are a lot of people who just only want to come at 8:30, and there's a whole lot of people. I think over my years, I've been on because of the jobs I've had, I've been on the ad council all these 35 years.
Yes.
35 years on the ad council, I'm out of my mind. It's not bad. I'm laughing, but people just roll their eyes and, what are you doing, But I cannot tell you how many times there have been discussions about changing the schedule and having one service and how do we do it. I bet I've been in 4 or 5 subcommittees over the years. And the fact of the matter is that it just doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for the young people, or it doesn't work for the older people. And as a choir member, you end up coming to both services.
Yes.
But there are significant numbers of people who only come to one service.
And adjusting that time schedule kind of throws
Well, and I
everybody off.
see all that because I see when people come, and I can
Yes.
look at people's records and see how often they come to the 8:30 or whatever it is like
Sure.
that. Tell you something else that's funny about, speaking of those services, is the bit about where people sit. And, when you sing in the choir or when you're the minister, you see everybody and and the ministers, particularly a lot of them, they kind of count on the fact. They know if they want to talk to Charlie Ledbetter that's where Charlie sits, and they can spot it. People.
Yes.
And I remember when Steve Miller was here, he gave this big sermon one Sunday and said, okay, everybody is going to have to sit in a different place for the next month or so. And we were singing in choir, and it was hysterical. People came in, and they stood there, and they headed for their seats, and then they would stop, and then they'd go sit someplace else, and it lasts 2 weeks. And people they're comfortable. They know the people that sit around them and stuff, and moving around just wasn't in their thing, And of course, I don't have to worry about that. I have a seat. I sit in the choir. I don't have to worry about having a seat at Easter Sunday or anything.
Yep.
You know.
Well, we Methodists do follow certain methods and creatures of habit in where we sit, that's for sure.
Well, good heavens, you go back east and they had pews with people's names on
That's
them.
right.
That's not, I don't think that's just Urbana method.
That's
I
right.
think that's probably true of people in churches everywhere, even small congregations, I think.
Yep. Well, Nancy, we talked about some of the people and the events and the times at Hope Church. Did we leave anything out that you think about you'd like to tell us?
Oh, no, I don't know. We've pretty much covered a whole lot of things, other than, I think pretty much the events and things that have happened. And, it's hard to go back all these years. 35 years is a long time to have been deeply involved. And, I've seen a lot of interesting things over the years. For the most part, all the committees I've served on and all the people that I've worked with, everybody, they don't do anything without having the best interests of Hope at heart. And people grumble or they'll be upset because something happens. And the people that make those decisions put a lot of time and effort into it. An example being maybe just this last summer when we had so many staff changes at one time. And that was difficult. But I of course, have never served on staff parish because I can't, because I'm a staff member.
Part of the staff.
But I know that those people put heartfelt, agonizing time and effort and energy into it. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. When there's a staff change, a difficult
Yes.
staff change particularly. And I just think that the people on committees put a lot of time and effort, and I believe in committees. I mean, I think if a committee comes and has made a decision, a lot of people have thought about that, and maybe it isn't what you want or what you think is the best thing, but I'll bet your opinion has been discussed by that committee, and I'm a believer in that system of things, and
Yeah.
we're methodical things.
Yep, I agree with that. They're good-hearted people and,
Yeah.
well-intentioned people.
And-
And I like that about the Methodist Church, that we are the church.
Yeah.
We get to run
Yeah.
our church. So-
And we can, yes, there's a discipline and we're supposed to do this and that, but we pretty much can run our church pretty much. And I suspect that Hope Church is a church that has some very strong leadership and people that have been in leadership roles, more than a handful, but over the years. And I've never been involved at the conference level, but I suspect that Hope is kind of known for having it. And it may be that it's maybe a difficult church for pastors to come to, because we have awfully strong, very strong lay leadership. And I think that there's a list right here of all the pastors. I look at that list, and I think that the ones that had the most trouble were the ones that didn't quite accept the fact that Hope really did have a very strong, and being a pastor is difficult. I mean, they come and it's their church and they have ownership in it, but we've been here, I've been here 35, I think 40 years, you've been here as long, Charlie, so it's difficult. And I think also, I think it must be very difficult. I can't imagine being a pastor. I think it must be difficult because you come in the pastor's role with spiritually and God connected and religious and all of these words that go into it, and the administrative side of it is difficult.
Yes.
And I think it must be extremely difficult to balance that. I'm sure it is. I've talked to Sam. One thing I did talk to Sam about at one point, and I think that's got to be hard. And I think so for the pastors that have had a hard time here, some of them are just not. They're sort of have been unwilling to accept how strong our leadership was.
Yes.
I mean, and I know that's where, when I did have some trouble back in the years with Dr. Vickery, I mean, that was part of the problem, that I was a woman in a position of leadership, and this was not a good thing. But anyway, but Hope is, as I said, people have asked me, I can't tell you how many times, why do you do it for so long? And it's because I believe that you have to give to the organization you're part of, if it's church or club. And if you don't, it doesn't really ever become yours. It isn't yours. It isn't your church, it's not your club, it's not your organization, it's not your group if you don't give something to it, Now, maybe you carry. I have a sticker on my desk that my family gave me at Christmas, a Post-it, and it says, "Stop me before I volunteer again."
You have trouble saying no?
And I've got it sticking up there, but I haven't paid any attention to it yet.
Well, Nancy, as a recipient of many benefits from your service, I thank you. And I thank you for interviewing with us here today to talk about what you remember of Hope.
You know something? I'm just going to add one thing to that. I believe that thanking volunteers that's why we do it. We don't do it for monetary gain, obviously. We don't do it for this. But to say thank you to volunteers in just small ways or even big ways, and that the Sam Day Award is a classic example of that. You thank someone and you're thanking all of the volunteers. I did, when we had the trivia, they came up with that trivia game, a couple of...
Yes.
Okay. I put together a question. I did a statistical analysis of how many people are on committees or groups that go into the Sunday morning service. And And I came up with, and there are many repeats, many names that repeat, but by the time you do Sunday school teachers and classroom teachers and this and that, and choirs and communion servers and scripture readers and ushers and people who make coffee, etc., I came up with 370 people on. Now they're duplicates, they don't all come, but I mean, and that's what goes into Sunday morning services.
Yes.
That's a lot of volunteers.
Yes, it is.
And they all do great jobs, and you know, even the ushers, that's not an easy job. I don't have to do that. It's one of the things I don't have to do.
We count on seeing you on Sundays in the choir.
Well, as long as the voice holds out
That would be
and
good.
the creek don't run.
Well, Nancy, thank you for this interview.
Oh, you're welcome, Charlie. It's fun to talk about it. I love it.